Good evening. I want to welcome everyone to tonight's Florida Pulse. I'm Rick Christie, Executive Editor of the Palm Beach Post, a member of Gannett's USA Today Network, Florida. It's been nearly 10 years since the shooting death of Trayvon Martin sparked a discussion about racism and helped galvanize Black Lives Matter and other social justice movements in the United States. But what's changed in the last decade? And what hasn't? Trayvon was shot February 26, 2012 by George Zimmerman, a neighborhood watch volunteer who claimed he felt threatened by the Black teenager. Zimmerman followed the 17-year-old in his car and then on foot. Yet Zimmerman, who is white, was found not guilty of second-degree murder and manslaughter at a trial a year later. Over the past decade, Trayvon, who would have been 27 years old this week, has become both an inspiration for those seeking social justice, racial equality, and police reform, as well as a lightning rod for those pushing back against perceived lawlessness. Tonight, on the Florida Pulse, we want to talk about the impact of Trayvon's tragic shooting death. Did it somehow move forward our discussions on the always difficult topics of race and policing, or did it just provide another wall to progress? Joining me tonight on the Florida Pulse is a group of panelists from around the state of Florida who will offer their unique perspectives on these topics. First, Dr. Rachel Grant, an assistant professor in the University of Florida College of Journalism and Communications. Welcome, Dr. Grant. Kevin Warren, CEO and founder of the Life Center in Tallahassee, which works with at-risk youth and families. Welcome, Kevin. Jacqueline Miller, the mother of 2 sons and 1 daughter, is a businesswoman and on the executive committee board at the Collier County NAACP and Criminal Justice and Redistricting Committees. Welcome, Jacqueline.
Thank you.
And Terry Coney is president of the Lakeland branch of the NAACP. All right, well, welcome everyone. And so why don't we just go ahead and get started, because we've got a lot to discuss. First thing I want is for everyone to talk about Trayvon's shooting death and how it impacted you in a personal way, if you would. I think that'll kind of loosen things up a little bit so we can talk about some of these other things. But if you would, just go ahead and start us out, Dr. Grant.
So I would say for me, when Trayvon Martin was killed, very close to his age, very young. I was living in Arkansas and still very much coping and dealing with a lot of the idea of what it means to be a young Black person in this country. At the time, I was working in media, and a lot of the media narratives and the media stories that were happening very much made me realize how important my job is, but also how my job, there's some complicated weaving of those understandings. So sorry for the dog in the back.
It's quite all right.
But for me, it was very much a call to what led me to go get my PhD eventually, seeing the role of social justice, social movements, and very much seeing the role of activism from a media standpoint, and how advocacy and digital media very much changed how we all integrated and communicated about racism. So for me, that was the biggest impact. Eventually, that was 2012. So 3 years later, I would go get my PhD. Very much influences the research that I do. Very much influences how I teach and what I teach.
Right.
But from a very personal level, it exposed a lot of the vulnerabilities of being a young Black person and being perceived as a threat for justice existing in this country.
All right, thank you for sharing that. Terry?
Well, for me, when I initially heard it, it's always that shock. And I think back when it happened, it was actually, we just had this past weekend had the NBA All-Star weekend. And that
Mhm.
same weekend was the NBA All-Star weekend. So
Right.
I'm a little older than most on the panel, so I've heard about things like this. So I was trying to get more background on it. But the initial part is, why did this guy think he empowered himself to approach this kid? And so that takes us back many, many years and decades on. We have a young black kid just coming from the store
Mm-hmm.
with Skittles and really doing nothing wrong. I mean, what really was his crime? But this guy took it upon himself to basically interrogate him and then approach him, even after he was told by the police, do not proceed. But he did.
Mm-hmm.
So, as information followed, the outrage just grew. So, and some of you may remember I think it was 1998, gentleman in Jasper, Texas. I think his name was James Byrd Jr. These guys picked up off the street and eventually beat him up and drug him down the street for
Right.
no crime. So it makes us feel like black men are endangered species constantly.
Okay. And Jacqueline?
Well, I remember specifically exactly what I was doing at the time that we heard about it. And I was actually out fishing with my sons. And it hit me, and I realized that when I let them or allow them to go outside, or they decide I'm going to go to the store, or they decide I'm going to go hang out with my friends or go to a baseball game, I'm not guaranteed that they are going to come back on the simplest terms. And it also, it took me back in history, being a little bit of a history buff, and remembering some of the same situations that happened to us as a people, how many people were deputized, normal citizens were deputized just to go out and bring back slaves during slavery.
Mm-hmm.
And this all culminated with the fact that we have here a citizen, not even deputized, and
Right.
has no right to be doing this. And he takes it upon himself to even ask someone who is free to, what are you doing? Why are you here? And be able to stop that person and question them when he has no right to do that. So it made me realize that there's a lot of trauma, that I was more traumatized historically than I knew. And it brought a lot of that trauma to surface. But it also let me know as a mother that I have to really teach my children, teach my grandchildren, that there's other things that are out there, other people that are out there that make you unsafe just because of the melanin in your skin.
Yeah.
And that's a difficult conversation to have, even with
Absolutely.
any children. It's a very difficult conversation, but as a mother, it's terrifying. As a citizen, and it actually culminated in to a point where I knew I had to do something. And ever since then, I've been working. I've been actively involved in many, many things, but understanding that we have a long way to go. We
Mm-hmm.
do. We definitely have a long way to go.
I want to come back to that a little bit later about the talk, that a lot of black parents have to have with their young sons in particular. But Kevin, can you share how this affected you personally when you heard the news?
Yeah, all of you guys' answers were great. And I think for me, uh, what was probably the most moving and impactful feeling or emotion that struck through me was urgency. I was a young father of two, pretty fresh husband, uh, And that kind of rocked me to the core when I realized that at 17, that young man lost his life, or his life was taken.
Mm-hmm.
And no matter how tough I am, no matter how prepared I believe I am, no matter how hard I work, no matter how good of a citizen and a human being I focus on being and I strive to be, fear of the color of my skin could create a level of chaos that could keep me from getting to my babies, keep me from achieving my ultimate purpose on this planet. And so for me, it was just a sense of urgency. And I'll tell you, in these last 10 years, I feel like you just had to sprint, and you just never know when your time is as a Black man. And so you really try to leave it on empty every single day. And so for me, it was a level of urgency that I felt that I had to kind of continue to move. And all of the things that I've seen in my head and had in my heart, the time was now. So I got to work. I got to work.
Okay. Wow. Thank you all for sharing those. Those were some pretty sobering stories, actually. Dr. Grant, let me ask you this. Why did Trayvon's killing seem to galvanize movements like Black Lives Matter? Because Black Lives Matter was already around. There had already been events like in Ferguson and then Eric Brown. Why did Trayvon's killing seem to do more?
I think when we think about these movements, and I think there's so much complacency in just history, and I know we're going to get to this conversation eventually, but we tend to displace history as a historical past, as a distance.
Okay.
And the fact is, Trayvon Martin was killed in 2012, and we tend to forget, just as it was mentioned earlier, that we psychologically and historically in the legacy of slavery, it was the job of white people to report Black people. Like, we were not meant to be walking around existing without freedom papers. And the fact is that surveillance of a Black individual is still prevalent today. I think we view our society as a post-civil rights, post-racial society.
Mm-hmm.
And we like to believe in the idea of color blindness. But color does not negate fear. Color does not negate action and criminality that's attached. And so I think Trayvon Martin, compared to some of the other killings in the past, Rodney King, Oscar Grant, we have people between that period that were killed. The fact is, this was a neighbor. This is just somebody in the neighborhood who had the right to kill, and had and by the criminal justice system did not break any laws, did not do anything wrong in terms of assaulting this young man for just walking home. And I think that's, especially to Black men, that is, how do you live in a world like that? How do you live and exist in a world where you can't even walk to the store? Definitely galvanizing the idea of the media tropes that came out of this. You had people calling him a thug, people talking about toxicology reports, people talking about all the mugshots and images.
Well, that's interesting. I was going to ask you about that next, because I really want you to continue with this, because I was wanting to quickly hold a mirror up to myself and my profession. The media, would you say the media was helpful?
No, I don't think
helpful.
It was not helpful in the fact that we quickly jumped on a 17-year-old who was walking home to say that he was immediately doing something wrong, that he was a thug, that any person who's attacked is going to fight back.
Yeah.
And even if they're not going to fight back, that doesn't mean you kill them, And I think, to the media standpoint, we quickly saw magazines and Black media. That's why hashtag Black Lives Matter was so important. But at the same time, Ebony magazine did the whole covers around "We Are Trayvon," and had celebrities like Spike Lee and Boris Cujo featuring these families. We had the hoodie march, and probably the biggest thing that really made people kind of stand up and listen in terms of media is when President Barack Obama had that press conference.
Yeah.
And he said, "I could have been Trayvon." And
Right.
I think for people who could never understand racism, when you have your president saying, "What you say about that black boy is the same way people perceive me."
Right.
And that speaks to a lot of the conversations in terms of how we view race.
Yeah.
Because we tend to like to put Black people in boxes, very much as we talked a little bit earlier, that you need to be a good Black person. You need to be a good, honorable Black person. But quickly we see and we saw that over and over again, that is not the case. You know, the phrase "the unarmed Black man" has been criminalized. It's been used, we use it journalistically correct. And I talk about this with my students, but it also imposes the fact that a Black person has to be unarmed in order to be seen as innocent. Has to be seen, there has to be some justification for us killing unarmed Black men, but Black people in general shouldn't have to justify their existence or have an alibi to why they walk around every day and exist. They don't have, it's a sad fact that technology became a huge aspect, but if we didn't have mobile phones and we didn't have technology, people would still believe that our killings are not
Right.
being called for justice.
Let me let Kevin jump in here because he looked like he wanted to jump in when I mentioned media.
Oh, I'm sure. I'm ready for everybody to talk about the media in the worst way because, like I said,
it's okay. It's okay. I have to have thick skin in this job. Kevin, what did you want to add to what Dr. Grant was saying?
No, this whole thing just got me itching. It's just the topic in general. But no, the media for me, it defends, right? It defends social injustice before it gives just precedent, the truth to the story, right? And it frustrates us. It frustrates me, and not just anyone, but because it does so much harm, right? And I think about it all the time. For me, the most dangerous situations that I find myself in are in front of a young teenage Black male in poverty, right? Who feels like he has to lose it all, risk it all. And in front of a middle-aged white person who already believes they know me based on their view of media. And those are two extremely dangerous positions to be in because both are completely influenced and brainwashed by what they see either on TV or social media or media in general. And so for me, opportunities and platforms like this become not only essential, but it's a fundamental core of our culture to be able to have open dialogue in such a manner that we can share on a platform where we can share some of our truths and some of our, I'm not going to say them as fears, but they're just the realities of our experience in this country without the victimization from power, right? As successful folks, but it's up to us. I'm thankful for social media in certain realms because, like you said, Doctor, we can take back kind of some of the narrative. We can begin to shape our own stories and begin to share some of the good things. If we all look in the comment section now, we'll see some things that are maybe like turn a side eye, but it's just the ignorance of perpetuating the media's, portrayal of what it is to be Black in America. Yeah. And the fact is, the media has no idea, right, what it is to be Black in America. They really just continue to perpetuate the old adage fears.
I'll just say, as a member of the media, I know you're talking about the overall, because I personally have a pretty good idea, what it is, but I know you're talking about the overall and the struggle that we all have to do that. So I appreciate that. But Terry, let me ask you about this. because I started off asking Dr. Grant about Black Lives Matter and how it got galvanized by this, even though it was already going. And I want to come back to Jacqueline as well. That one of the things we found out when we were reporting our story on the 10th anniversary was that this was, in terms of the groundswell of protests and stuff about Trayvon's shooting, that did come mostly from younger people, and that it seemed to take a while for people in our generation, I will say, took a while for us to kind of like join in. Why do you think that happened? I mean, there was some criticism from younger people of color that we were just moving a little bit too slow. People in our generation were moving too slow. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, the primary reason I would say, growing up in the 60s and then the transition during the 70s.
Right.
As we moved in after we had the Civil Rights Bill passed, Voting Rights Bill passed, and things opened up for the Black community of Black people, somewhat African Americans, because we've gone through iterations of names from, N-word, colored, Negro, you name it. It was almost like, as a people, we exhaled, and especially Gen X. They were the first group that really started all desegregated schools and education for the most part. So it's this sense that things were better. That just the sense that things were better. Now for my generation, I'm old enough to know about Emmett Till and I saw on TV everything that happened in the 60s, in the early iteration of the civil rights movement. I spoke in my church Sunday and talking about 1963. We all know Martin Luther King gave that I Have a Dream speech, August 28th, 1968. But in July 1963, but in July of 1963, there were some girls protesting, trying to integrate a theater in Americus, Georgia, and they got picking up and taken away. And if you look up the story of the lost girls at the stockade in Leesburg, Georgia, you find out their stories, 15 of them. Or Medgar Evers got assassinated in June of 1963. 3 weeks after Dr. King gave his speech, the 4 little girls got blown up in the church at 16 Street Baptist Church in Birmingham. So for my generation, we dealt with all this trauma. But for the next generation, maybe things had calmed down some, and probably until probably the next most significant event that came along was Rodney King.
Right.
And I was in the Air Force at that time, and I was in the car with my base commander, and you had the riots going on in LA. He said, what do you think about this? I said, well, I don't care what a man did. Nobody deserves to get beat and kicked like that. So I don't know whether we're going through another iteration in Martin Luther King's book, Where Do We Go From Here? He actually has a chapter on racism and white backlash. We're dealing with this, everything about critical race theory now. Well, they're not concerned about critical race theory. In Florida, we have a governor that wants to. There's a bill going through now, basically the bill to keep from hurting white people feeling. Are you serious? So when we came to Trayvon, and no matter what the negatives were, this was a 17-year-old kid. His only no crime. He was walking home. That's and you follow him and you accost him because he had a hoodie on. Just think if he would have, what would have happened if he would have touched him on the shoulder, say, "Hey, what are you doing?" And he turned around, he saw it was a white kid.
Let me ask this, because we've already touched, Kevin did mostly, and I think Jacqueline did, about Black males in America and ours, because you know, do you think there's a continuing fear of black males in American society? Do you think that this continuing fear played a role with the general public's perception of what happened to Trayvon?
It's always been this thought, this perception out there of the big strong black man. You know, we can't hound him, so we got to get him down. We got to subdue him. So that thought process continues to perpetuate itself.
Yeah, but you still have now. I think we were talking, off camera. We were talking about how that there's still people out there who are saying when we the picture that we use of Trayvon, I think when he was like 12 or 13, people are criticizing me for using that picture and saying, why don't you use the picture of when he was, he was 17, when he was killed. He wasn't like a 20-something-year-old man. He was 17 years old, and so it's interesting how people still seem to think that or want to use that, this image as you were just describing of this big scary black guy, to justify things that are even rather heinous, really, because I don't see myself as threatening, but again, that is something that it seems like black men in our country have to deal with or have to do with.
Always.
And Jacqueline, I know in your, can you talk about that a little bit? Because you started talking earlier about the conversation you had to have with your son. So,
well, that along with the fact that being a part of the NAACP and seeing some of the changes that's happened within our community and around the country, I think everyone needs a justification for the wrongdoings that they do.
Okay.
And this is what's happening. It's just, when you see something like this is happening and you're saying you have a black man, I felt threatened. We've seen many, many times on videos of where these women have not been threatened. It's on video and they're calling and saying, and the first thing that they say to law enforcement, I'm afraid for my life, or I feel threatened. And they know that these are buzzwords that will cause law enforcement to come out full force because it's a black man. And automatically, because you are black, you are a threat. And if it wasn't for the media, and just going back a little bit, there's two pieces to that for the media. There's a positive portion of it because of the fact that much of this information is getting out. The other thing is how it's being portrayed within the media. You will hear more about these crimes and, many times even with black kids that may have the same types of charges as other white kids, but their photographs are painted all over the news. Whereas many times you will not see those pictures of those white kids that have been charged. And these are teenagers. And all of this is perpetuated over and over and over. So when you have someone and you have a set of people, a group of people, that the only way that they can deal with what they've done, the atrocities of what they've done, is to come up with an excuse of because he was black and I was afraid, that's not good enough. And when we have young people today, over the years, we have become complacent as a people, as black people, because after Martin Luther King, the civil rights movement, the redlining was addressed. We can now purchase homes. We can actually go into restaurants and we can eat. Now, all of those things is easy for us now, but we cannot sleep on it because as with everything, it comes back around. And we're facing that today. And the young kids are seeing it, the black, white, all of them, of every race. And they're standing up and they're saying they're not going to tolerate it. As you said, these were the children, and I call them children, but these 20-year-olds, these 17-year-olds, the young generation that were out marching. They were the ones, like they said, that our age, the 40s and 50s, they were and above, we were a little quiet.
Mm-hmm.
There was a lot of quietness there because of the fact that we've gotten ours. But how are we going to keep it? And also, how is it affecting our generations after generation after generation? The reality is that when it gets to a point when we as a people cannot walk down the street without being harassed, and we have to um, we have to explain why we're in an area where the homes may be $300,000. Now that's a problem. We have doctors that one of the doctors, I believe he was in Miami, that was loading up the back of his van to go to a nonprofit event
Mm-hmm.
to donate, to give back to his community. Law enforcement stopped him. Why? Because he was loading the back of his van. Where
Okay.
in the world did that become a crime? Where did that become suspicious? Because I'm loading the back of my van with items where I'm going, and
Okay.
that's the issue that we need to face, and we need to be real with it.
All right. Let me ask Dr. Grant. Let me ask this. When we say law enforcement, we're talking about police because that's the first thing that we all run into. But after today's decision in the Ahmaud Arbery case, the federal case where the three men were convicted of federal hate crimes, and then the Dante Wright decision also, is there an issue? Can we just focus on police, or should we also be focusing on prosecutors, and even the judges, and it's part of the problem in the justice system? Is that still an issue, you think?
I like to think of it as a different perspective completely. I think we have to call it state sanctioned violence because it's not necessarily violence done by the state, but it's the
Mm-hmm.
violence in which our state allows to exist. So it doesn't necessarily have to come from a like a law enforcement authority. I think with Trayvon Martin, we see that idea that
Right.
everybody's been very much speaking on, the idea that policing and the idea of the idea that I have a right to feel protected, and if my life is threatened I need to report. Those are narratives which, as many people mentioned, I want to go back to the idea of these images, the images that whether a Black person is actually committing a crime or attempting committing a crime, that Black people are deviant. And so the Blackness and Black criminality, it is very much imposed by those media stories, the media narratives, the idea going back to mugshots. We had Brock Turner, who was actually arrested and accused of sexual assault and rape, and they decided they wanted to use his high school photo versus his mugshot, because we don't necessarily get to escape that image that we are constantly committing crime. And so
Mm-hmm.
the criminal justice system is very much feeding into that idea as well. That we talk about the war on drugs, the war on crime. We talk about Black on Black crime. We have all these terms to generate some type of negative, demeaning, inhumanizing understanding about how Black communities work or how Black people are perceived or stereotyped. And
Mm-hmm.
all these terms are related to criminal justice policy, stop and frisk, stand your ground. All these things are not associated with other communities, but very much in how we view Black communities. So I don't think it's enough to just assume that it's our law enforcement. The Ahmaud Arbery case is another case in which you have an individual who's running, and two white men feel as if they need to go and police. And I think that's
Mm-hmm.
the idea that Kevin was talking about. Black men are policed. Their
Okay.
bodies are policed in what ways they can move and function. And speaking from the generation, me being part of that generation when Trayvon passed, that inability to actually function and move, it did very much enrage me in terms of why is this still going on? Why is this still happening?
Yeah.
And the idea that even as a professor, we're not, walking. People don't think I'm a professor. Black people don't get to have their credentials tied to their chest in order to stop people from harming them. And it's a constant, like I said, it's a constant state sanctioned violence because it is sanctioned by the state. The state does not punish for the killing or violence done towards Black people. So I think beyond just the beyond law enforcement, it is very much perceived, and we know in the Black community, when we see these cases, we already know, okay, if the person's white, then he's probably not going to be charged, and that's sad.
Let me thanks. Let me ask Terry, because you've been at this for a good bit here, and you've seen the changes with the and Dr. Ray just mentioned stand your ground laws. How should we view stand your ground laws in your opinion, and why? And why?
Well, personally, I never thought that stand your ground was maybe a necessary law.
Mm-hmm.
Now, stand your ground evolved from a law where somebody broke into your house.
Right, the castle doctrine.
As long as you kept them in your house, then you could shoot them and you're defending yourself.
Mm-hmm.
But if you were outside, then you had to step back.
Retreat.
Yes. So it always appeared to me that the law was put in place really to protect those mostly that if you looked at statistics, it probably wasn't a factor. So,
Mm-hmm.
and then to go back to the legal system, the legal system has always kind of been tied to make life tougher for Blacks in America. We went in the 90s when you had laws that were different. If you had crack cocaine versus powder cocaine,
Right.
We go back to, we fought separate but equal. Brown versus Board came out of fighting separate but equal, which was actually made law and legal in 1896 by the Supreme Court. Mm-hmm. So I've seen things written, it was the law, but was it right? Was it moral? So we're constantly fighting these laws. We had a Voting Rights Act from 1965, and it appears that they're constantly cutting back on that. And as we look at all these restrictive voting laws coming into place, the party or the side that are putting it in, they say, well, we want to make our voting process more secure. And was it ever unsecure? So, you have more people that are voting now. So, we want to change the political narrative. So, but it all comes into play. I mean, even.
Well, is it your view that stand your ground laws are a threat to Black men in particular?
Yes, I do, because we still fall back on the issue of the threatening Black man. I mean, when we had Tamar Rice was killed in Cleveland. What was he? 10 years old?
Yeah, 11.
Yeah. So even at that age, now I understand, the deadly weapons, but there has to be a process, and really from the law enforcement side, and nobody ever presses them on going back and readdressing their use of deadly force. But but when you watch the whole George Floyd issue, I mean, that probably was more galvanizing and shocking for me as I watched it, that this guy's really, he's going to kill him right in front of us. And he did, with no care whatsoever. So, as far as stand your ground goes, and in the Zimmerman case, as it turned out, they actually they decided not to use stand your ground, but self-defense.
Right.
Well, in Trayvon's case, he was actually defending himself.
Let me ask Kevin here, because I want to turn the mirror again on myself and the media. Can the media do a better job here, and what are we missing?
I'm so happy you asked me that question, Rick, because I have a lot of media friends who look like me, and I really did feel bad about that portrayal, because here's the truth. In my experience, there are a lot of really good journalists, Thing is, major media outlets are still controlled, right? And so with that, I don't necessarily look at the major media outlets. I find my news in smaller outlets, right, that can have a little bit more control. And in those outlets, you do see really truthful, penetrating stories, really trying to shed different lights and perspectives on solutions. And so, yes, the media is and can do a better job of really sharing that narrative. But I think, and I kind of want to just kind of take an opportunity to piggyback, kind of go back a second on the police and kind of the relationship, and where the accountability stands. Here in Tallahassee, it may be shocking because I know we have First 48 in every other city, but from a violent standpoint, we're nearly at the top of our state per capita. From a poverty level, we're at the top of our state in the zip code where I'm currently sitting in my office and center is currently in. And so the sheriff's office is a driver or three wood away from me. And we have a Black sheriff by the name of Walt McNeil, and he's really progressive. I met with him, and what really motivated me, Rick, was that he looked at me in my face as a Black man and said, I am desperate. My job is to respond. My job is to find the criminal, find the culprit, and put them in prison. And that's my job. My job is not to be a mental health therapist. My job is not to be, a community the community solutionist. That's the community's job. And he told me, he said, I have not seen the solutions come from the Black community. I've seen ideas come from the Black community. Okay. I've not seen key performance indicators. I've not seen delivery. I have not seen the structure of what it takes to really draw down the funds and the resources to really make a change. And that woke us up and woke me up. And when we look at, they can't do it all. I look at one thing, we as a Black community and a culture, we have to begin to create leverage, right? We talked earlier about the pictures, that once something happens, the white kid doesn't get put up and the Black kid does. Truth be told, that's a money and power situation, right? It's somebody had more money and somebody had better power with relationships. And those things didn't hit the media outlet, right? We could do the same thing if we were to galvanize and really create leverage. I think that's what we need to be able to do. Instead of spending time trying to break systems, we either need to play this system to win, right? Or we need to just build our own systems and defend our own systems, right? Because we're in a different time frame. We can no longer sit and try to break a system because it's not going to be broken, right? It is literally the fibers of this country. So we need to create a system of leverage in which we can really protect our own. We can really create assets for ourselves and economic value. We have to do these things on a larger scale in order to create the leverage that we need to really fight this fight. We need to create lobbyists. We need to put in politicians. We can stack the odds the same way the game has been played and won. We can win the game the same way. So it's not just on the police. It's not just on the media. It really becomes these types of conversations. What are those of us on this panel? We're all in the same state. Do we connect after, right? Then how do we mobilize? How do we be able to pull in, create leverage for us to kind of advance more and pull down more resources for those of us who are really in the trenches doing that fight.
Oh, okay. Good, good.
Absolutely.
I want to, boy, I wish I could stay with that for a minute, but Dr.
I was
Grant,
going to
you want
answer his media question.
go ahead.
As a person, I teach like 200 students a semester, introduction to a class called Media Cultures and Identity. And to answer your question,
Yeah,
I think we can do better, but I think it requires that we have to recognize that before people become journalists, they're human and they have biases. And part of that in our training of our students and future journalists is making them aware of these biases. And so, what a lot of things that we've talked about on this call, I've had to sit and make my students, predominantly white students, be aware of. You know, be aware that there's a talk that Black kids have with their parents, that state-sanctioned violence does exist outside the idea that it's not just the police, but it's also the idea that white people have the power to police Black individuals. So I think in terms of exposing students in curriculum, in practice to these actual things will help improve in reporting. I do say this, that a lot of the students that I interact with are very aware and want to be, I don't want to say woke because again but they want to be aware of the social issues that are happening around them. Do they
right.
understand them? No. And that's why they're in my class. But it's not as if we're ignoring. I don't think universities or journalism schools are ignoring those issues. I think they're trying, but we all are also, everybody's talked about the critical race theory, the idea that the laws that are being in place to stop the educating of Black struggles. So I think it can be done, but it does happen whether the individual or the student or that university sees value in it.
Okay.
And I've been at different institutions where that is very much the case. But every institution is different. So
Yeah, true that.
they keep important as well.
Okay. Let me touch on a couple more things here before we run out of time, and I wanted to go back to Jacqueline to talk about what I mentioned at the very top, which was the talk. And I know that's extremely personal, but you brought it up and initially, and I want you to talk about, if you would, having that talk, with your sons or maybe even your daughter. And what did that sound like when you had to do that?
Well, I can say it was probably one of the most, it was definitely more difficult than the whole sex talk. The birds and the bees.
Yes.
But I think what really brought it to, the subject up was Trayvon's death. And, really speaking to them and talking to them about what has happened. But I've always been very open with them as far as historically what has happened. There are many things that were not taught to them in school. So therefore, we would get together, my nephews and, my sons, mostly boys, that touched upon some of the things that happened historically. So it started to, a little bit of it would build them and start planting the seed that there's certain things that they need to be aware of. And when they leave and they go out. Now, one of the things that happened with me, my son came home, my oldest, and he came home and he said that, he was riding up the escalator and another woman, older white woman, was riding down the escalator. And at the time he had the dreads, a little bit of the dreads and everything. And he said she grabbed her purse. And we had to sit down and we had to talk about that. These are some of the things that are that have been part of her life. Maybe something has happened in her life that now she has that fear. But also, son, this is the reality of what you may face every time you walk out the door. Right. Whenever you are, even when you're pulled over, I've always taught them to be courteous, but also you have to understand that even if you feel like something is happening to you that is unfair or wrong, or you've been accused of something that you're innocent of, be calm. Bring yourself home. Come home alive. And we're
Right.
going to fight this battle together. We're going to address it together. And it's and I have to say, with something that was said earlier, we have to heal ourselves. No one else outside of our community is going to come in and say that they have the be all end all solution to what's happening in our community. We have to find that solution. We have to come up with ways to address it, but move forward with doing it. And that comes from, I believe Keith just said, economics. We have to reinvest in our community. We have
Mm-hmm.
to reinvest in ourselves. So that reinvestment economically, but also we're reinvesting in our children by informing our children and making
Right.
sure that they're aware on how to come home safe. And these are the things you may not see. Um, People are not going to always be nice. When they see you, because of the fact that you're a Black male, they may consider you automatically as a danger or as a threat. But you cannot take that to the point where you're acting out on it. We have to learn how to deal with that trauma, because literally that's traumatizing.
Yeah.
That is actually traumatizing. And we need to face that not only as a Black people, but as a people, as a whole, that every time they walk out the door, they are traumatized. Even though they see our faces and we may be smiling, however, that may be a threat to some people. And
Okay.
that's the reality that we live with every day. That's my sons every day. That's many of the women that I've spoken to whose sons have been killed, not necessarily by law enforcement or anyone, but
Mm-hmm.
that's the reality that we face every day as a people.
Well, I thought I was gonna be able to avoid asking this question because we were running out of time here and everything, but you kind of forced me here, so I guess the producer's gonna have to just cut me off. Uh, but I mean, what she was just talking about, Kevin, just made me wonder. I'm wondering what type of effects this have, what she's talking about, and what we all know about it has on the young mind, right? And have you incorporated mental health in your work with at-risk youth?
Let me tell you again, an amazing question and point that we need to bring up. Um, I'm extremely proud to be a Black man. I'm extremely proud to be able to have done the internal work and continue to do the internal work to
Mm-hmm.
heal my traumas. And yes, we were just actually awarded. And I'm so thankful. I'm the executive director of an organization called We Are All We Need Incorporated, and that's a village mentality. We work together with our Lehigh County Sheriff's Office to develop a solution where we're the lead agency to create what's called the Village of Care. And this solution that I created was really focused around providing early mental health screenings and assessments for
Yeah.
those kids before Baker Act and arrest, true prevention services, and then qualifying them through those assessments to receive the actual ongoing services, whether it be substance abuse and or mental health or co-occurring disorders, as we consider them in the field, to provide these services regardless of insurance or eligibility, right? Once that we know that the need is there, we would provide it. And so DCF awarded us, we're in our second year of a grant, but DCF awarded us $1.2 million to really push this initiative forward over the next 3 years of
Wow.
really providing these mental health screens, because that's what it is, right? Poverty, COVID, these things really create mental illness, right? That young man, and I said it this way to our leaders and our commissioners, it is mental illness to hear gunshots and not get scared.
Mm-hmm.
It is mental illness to pick up a gun and to put it in your waistband as a part of your daily outfit, right? As a Black man, it is mental illness for me every day that I have to wake up. The very first life-changing and life-altering decision that I make every day is the clothes that I put on my back. Right? Every day, it's a life-changing decision what I wear. And so it's mental illness. So to answer your question, that's all we talk about. We focus on breaking stigmas. We have a podcast where the youth sit on. We talk about breaking stigmas in the Black and brown communities around mental illness and mental health. We challenge our agencies and our systems here in Leon County to truly do prevention work. And across the state, we have a center in Michigan also that we do this and focus on in my hometown of Saginaw, where we focus on increasing the amount of mental health and substance use pre-screens and assessments in order to qualify youth and families for service. That's our work. That's what we provide in our center, and that's what we provide and do with our nonprofit.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Let me ask, I'm going to ask Terry this because I wanted to kind of end where do we go next to improve race relations in Florida. But I wanted to preface that by saying, personally, as someone who's been around a while and been observing things for a while as a journalist, I was encouraged by the protests that I saw and the diversity of people in the protests that I saw. And seeing that justice is not, it wasn't just an issue for people of color, that those younger people who are out there energized and everything, they ran the gamut in terms of color, in terms of ethnicity, gender, and everything else. So Terry, looking at that, can you talk about where you believe we need to go next to improve race relations in our state? I know that's a big question, but if you could talk about it just for a couple of minutes.
Well, I guess first, the millennials or the Gen Zs are, I guess, coming up in the teens and 20s now, and they've seen a lot. These are kids that they're actually going through things that I didn't do. I never thought or never imagined having to go through shooting drills in school.
Right.
So that's part of their everyday now. And from Trayvon Martin to George Floyd to Ahmaud Arbery, they're actually seeing firsthand because of technology now. There are things that happen past time that may have happened and we'll find out 3 or 4 months later. But because of social media and cell phones and cameras, these kids almost can instantly engage in things. And they're not afraid to speak out and step out because, we've had this period where we've taught them, you see something, you say something. So I feel good about them going forward. And it's really almost like the scenario that say maybe my parents or the leaders of Dr. Martin Luther King were looking for, that as we brought these kids together of all races, they would really learn how to work together. Now, our leadership in the state now probably creates more chaos than help. And from a leadership standpoint, state level governor and legislature, we need to ask them to deal from a point of truth and trust, and not keep making up boogeyman issues just to get reelected. And that's totally negative. But from our young people point of view, I think we can feel proud and they're going to take us in a good place.
Okay. I guess I'm pretty much out of time here. So, because I did want everybody to kind of weigh in on that one, man, where we could go next and everything. But let me just say that, I want to thank you guys for joining us on the Florida Pulse this evening. This has been a great conversation, and with nowhere near enough time. But it's still, it was enlightening for me, and I believe it was for all of the folks who tuned in to hear us chat about this as well. And I do want to thank those folks who sat in on the discussion virtually, and who, if we didn't get to your questions, I'm sorry. I was chock full of so many of my own and everything, but feel free to watch it again on this YouTube channel and tell a friend. I'd also like to invite all of you to support local journalism and conversations like this. Visit usatoday.com/Florida Network and subscribe to your hometown newspaper today. So good night to everyone, and stay safe.